The rain came out of nowhere, a sudden downpour that turned the world into a blur of silver and gray. Julian stood frozen on the dock, his sneakers sinking into the wet wood, as the lake churned under the storm's fury. He'd come to Lake Willow to escape, but now he was trapped, heart racing, soaked to the bone, and wondering how his life had spiraled into this moment. It was supposed to be a simple weekend getaway. Julian Carter, 25, had driven 6 hours from Brooklyn to upstate New York at the insistence of his college friend, Lena. "You need a break," she'd said, her voice firm over the phone. "Come to my family's lake house. It's quiet, it's chill, and you can finally stop overthinking everything." Julian, a graphic designer who'd been burning out under the weight of deadlines and a recent breakup, couldn't argue. He packed a bag, threw it in his beat-up Honda, and headed north, expecting nothing more than a few days of hiking, beers, and maybe a chance to sketch the scenery. But the universe, it seemed, had other plans. Lena's family lake house was a sprawling, cedar-shingled retreat nestled among pines, with a private dock stretching into Lake Willow's glassy waters. When Julian arrived, Lena greeted him with a hug and a cold IPA, her curly hair bouncing as she dragged him inside to meet her dad, Michael. Michael Sullivan, 45, was nothing like Julian had pictured. He wasn't the soft-spoken, buttoned-up father Lena had described in passing. Instead, Michael was broad-shouldered with a rugged charm, salt and pepper hair, a faint scar above his left eyebrow, and eyes that seemed to see right through you. He shook Julian's hand with a grip that lingered a second too long, his smile warm but guarded. "Welcome to the chaos," Michael said, gesturing to the cozy, cluttered living room. Julian laughed, but something in Michael's gaze made his stomach flip, a feeling he quickly shoved aside. The first day was easy. Lena, Julian, and a few of her local friends spent the afternoon swimming and grilling burgers on the deck. Michael mostly kept to himself, tinkering with a boat motor or reading on the porch, but Julian caught himself stealing glances. The way Michael moved, confident, unhurried, stirred something in him, a curiosity he wasn't ready to name. By evening, as the group played cards and laughed over old college stories, Julian felt lighter than he had in months. But then the storm rolled in. It was late afternoon on the second day when the sky darkened. Lena and her friends had gone into town for groceries, leaving Julian alone at the lake house with Michael. Julian, restless and inspired by the moody clouds, grabbed his sketchbook and headed to the dock to draw. He was halfway through capturing the lake's jagged horizon when the first raindrops fell. Within minutes, the storm unleashed its full force, soaking his clothes and smudging his sketches. He cursed, shoving the sketchbook under his jacket, and sprinted toward the house, only to slip on the wet grass and land hard in the mud. "Julian," Michael's voice cut through the rain. He stood at the edge of the porch, a silhouette against the warm glow of the house. "Get in here before you drown." Julian scrambled to his feet, embarrassed but grateful, and stumbled toward the porch. Michael met him halfway, a towel in hand, his flannel shirt already damp from the downpour. "You're a mess," Michael said, chuckling, but his eyes were soft with concern. "Come inside. Let's get you dried off." Inside, the house smelled of cedar and coffee. Michael handed Julian the towel and pointed to a small bathroom down the hall. "There's a shower in there. Warm up. I'll grab you some dry clothes." Julian nodded, his teeth chattering, and shuffled to the bathroom. The hot water felt like salvation, washing away the mud and the chill. But as he stood under the spray, he couldn't shake the image of Michael's hand brushing his arm when he'd handed him the towel. It was nothing, he told himself, just a kind gesture, but his heart wouldn't listen. When Julian emerged, wrapped in the towel, Michael was waiting in the living room with a stack of clothes, a faded t-shirt and sweatpants that smelled faintly of pine and laundry detergent. "These should fit," Michael said, his voice low. They're mine, so they might be a bit big. Julian's cheeks burned as he took the clothes, hyper-aware of Michael's presence. He changed quickly in the bathroom, the oversized shirt slipping off one shoulder, and rejoined Michael in the living room, where a fire crackled in the hearth. You didn't have to do all this, Julian said, settling onto the couch. Michael shrugged, poking at the fire. Couldn't let you freeze out there. Besides, Lena would kill me if her friend caught pneumonia. He grinned, but there was a tension in the air, a quiet hum that made Julian's skin prickle. They sat in silence for a moment, the storm raging outside, the fire casting shadows across Michael's face. Julian noticed the lines around his eyes, the faint stubble on his jaw, and felt a pull he couldn't ignore. So, Michael said, breaking the silence, Lena says you're an artist. What do you draw? Julian hesitated, then pulled his damp sketchbook from his bag. He flipped to a page with a half-finished sketch of the lake, the lines blurred from the rain. Michael leaned closer, his shoulder brushing Julian's, and studied the drawing. This is good, he said, his voice genuine. You've got a way of capturing feeling. Julian's breath caught. No one had ever described his work like that. He looked at Michael, their faces inches apart, and for a moment, the world outside the lake house didn't exist. The storm didn't let up, and neither did the tension between them. Over the next hour, Julian and Michael talked about art, about life, about the paths they'd taken. Michael shared that he'd been a carpenter before taking a job as a park ranger, drawn to the solitude of the woods. Julian opened up about his breakup with his ex, Marcus, who'd left him feeling like he wasn't enough. I thought I was done with love, Julian admitted, staring into the fire. Like maybe I'm too much work. Michael's gaze softened. Anyone who thinks that doesn't deserve you, he said, his voice rough with conviction. Julian's heart stuttered, and he looked away, afraid of what his eyes might betray. Lena and her friends returned, shattering the moment. The house filled with noise, laughter, clinking bottles, the smell of takeout pizza. Julian tried to focus on the group, but his thoughts kept drifting to Michael, who'd retreated to the kitchen to clean up. When Julian offered to help, Michael waved him off, but not before their hands brushed again, sending a jolt through Julian's body. He went to bed that night in the guest room, staring at the ceiling, replaying every word, every glance. He was falling and he knew it, but Michael was Lena's dad, older, probably straight. This was a mistake, wasn't it? The next morning, the storm had passed, leaving the lake shimmering under a clear sky. Lena dragged Julian out for a hike, but his mind was elsewhere. He kept catching Michael's eye during breakfast, each look lingering longer than it should. By afternoon, when Lena suggested a boat ride, Julian volunteered to stay behind, claiming he wanted to sketch. Michael stayed too, saying he needed to fix a loose board on the dock. It was a flimsy excuse, and they both knew it. They worked in silence at first, Julian sketching on the dock while Michael hammered nearby. The air was thick with unspoken words. Finally, Michael set down his tools and sat beside Julian, their knees almost touching. You're quiet today, Michael said, his voice gentle. Julian swallowed, his pencil still. Just thinking. Michael tilted his head, studying him. About what? Julian's heart pounded. He could lie, brush it off, keep things safe. But something in Michael's eyes, open, searching, made him brave. About you, Julian said, barely above a whisper. Michael didn't flinch. He didn't pull away. Instead, he reached out, his calloused fingers grazing Julian's hand. I've been thinking about you too, he said, his voice raw. Julian's breath hitched. The world narrowed to the space between them, the lake lapping softly against the dock. Michael leaned closer, his eyes asking a question Julian was too scared to answer. But then Julian closed the gap, their lips meeting in a kiss that was tentative at first, then desperate, like they'd both been holding their breath for too long. The kiss changed everything. For the rest of the weekend, Julian and Michael stole moments when Lena wasn't looking. A brush of hands, a shared glance, a whispered conversation by the fire. But guilt gnawed at Julian. Lena was his friend, and Michael was her dad. What were they doing? On the last night, as the group roasted marshmallows under the stars, Julian pulled Michael aside. "We can't keep this a secret," he said, his voice shaking. "It's not fair to Lena." Michael nodded, his jaw tight. "I know, but I've never felt like this before, Julian. Not in years. Not since he trailed off." And Julian realized Michael was talking about his late wife, Lena's mom, who'd passed away a decade ago. They agreed to tell Lena after the trip, but the decision didn't ease the tension. Julian drove back to Brooklyn the next day, his heart a tangle of hope and fear. He and Michael texted constantly, their messages a mix of longing and caution. "I miss you," Michael wrote one night, "but I'm scared of messing this up." Julian replied, "Me too, but I don't want to stop." They planned to meet again, this time in the city, away from the lake house and its secrets. 2 weeks later, Michael drove to Brooklyn. They met at a quiet cafe in Park Slope, the kind with mismatched chairs and too many plants. Over coffee, Michael admitted he'd never been with a man before. "I didn't even know I could feel this way," he said, his voice low. "But with you, it's right." Julian reached across the table, squeezing his hand. "It's right for me too." They spent the day wandering the city, talking, laughing, stealing kisses in empty alleys. For the first time, Julian felt like he was enough, just as he was. But reality crashed in when Lena called. She'd found a text from Julian on Michael's phone, one that left no room for misinterpretation. "Dad, what the hell is going on?" she demanded when they met her at a diner the next day. Her eyes were red, her voice sharp with betrayal. Julian's stomach churned. "Lena, I'm so sorry," he started. But she cut him off. "You're my friend, Julian. And you?" She turned to Michael, tears spilling over. "You're my dad. How could you not tell me?" Michael took a deep breath, his hand trembling as he reached for Lena's. "I didn't know how to say it," he said. "I'm still figuring this out myself. But Julian, he's important to me." Lena pulled her hand away, her face a mix of anger and hurt. "You don't get to just spring this on me. I need time." She stormed out, leaving Julian and Michael in stunned silence. The weeks that followed were agony. Lena stopped answering Julian's texts, and Michael's messages grew sparse, weighed down by his guilt over hurting his daughter. Julian threw himself into work, but his sketches were all of Michael, the curve of his jaw, the warmth in his eyes. He wondered if he'd ruined everything, if love was always this costly. Then, one evening, Lena showed up at his apartment unannounced. Her face was softer, but her eyes were still guarded. "I'm not okay with this yet," she said, sitting on his couch. "But I don't want to lose you. Or Dad. I just need to understand." They talked for hours, Lena asking questions Julian answered as honestly as he could. He told her about the lake, the storm, the way Michael made him feel seen. She listened, her anger giving way to something like acceptance. "He's been alone for so long," she said finally. "If you make him happy, I'll try to be okay with it." Julian hugged her, tears in his eyes, and for the first time in weeks, he felt hope. When Michael arrived in Brooklyn the next weekend, Lena was there too. The three of them sat in Julian's tiny living room, the air thick with tension but also possibility. Lena didn't smile, but she didn't leave either. "I want you both to be happy," she said, her voice steady. "But don't hide things from me again." Michael nodded, his eyes glistening. "I promise, kiddo." Julian reached for Michael's hand, and this time Michael didn't pull away. Months later, Julian and Michael stood on the same dock at Lake Willow, the place where it all began. The lake was calm, reflecting a sky streaked with pink and gold. They'd faced storms, literal and figurative, but they'd come through. Lena was still adjusting, but she'd started inviting them to family dinners, even joking about Julian's terrible cooking. Michael wrapped an arm around Julian's waist, pulling him close. "I got soaked at this lake," Julian said, smiling. "But you told me to come inside and dry off with you." Michael laughed, kissing his forehead. "Best decision I ever made." Their love wasn't perfect. It was messy, complicated, and hard-won. But as they stood there, the world quiet except for the lapping water, Julian knew it was worth it. Love, he realized, wasn't about being enough for someone else. It was about finding someone who made you want to be your truest self, and choosing to build a life together one storm at a time.